Welcome back to Family Fridays. I'm Rachel Poisky, one of the Duchenne Connect coordinators in Texas. And today we are talking about sibling relationships. I think sometimes the sibling relationship is often an overlooked piece in the Duchenne journey. So today we're going to focus on the siblings. We have some great panelists today. We have Jill Castle. She is a Duchenne mom who has a master's in educational psychology. She teaches at ASU, and she also is a certified instructor with Sibling Shops, that is designed specifically to walk with siblings and help them process as they walk through the journey of having a special needs brother or sister. And she's also a Connect coordinator in Arizona. So we're so excited to have Jill join us. And our other guest, you may recognize her last name. Her mom, Stephanie, was on our panel last week. And this week, it's her turn. It's Abby Killian, and she is a Duchenne sibling. Abby lives in DC and works as a legislative correspondent up there. And she's the oldest of 5 kids. And Abby is going to share her particular perspective on being a Duchenne sibling. So we're so glad that they are here to join us. So I'm going to invite Jill now to just share kind of her best tips and best ideas of how to include the Duchenne sibling into the family in a healthy and in a way that helps them thrive. Jill?
Hi, everybody. So I was going to go over a lot of people in the Parent Project community know me already, but I've been in years ago. I got certified in Sib Shops because I was interested. I had spent so much time learning about Anthony and his Duchenne. I wanted to make sure that I learned more about my other child too, which was Oliver. So I took some great workshops and got certified, and then started leading the Sib Shops for Parent Project because I felt like they needed just as much attention at the conferences as our boys did. So today I'm just going to outline my top kind of 3 things to get the conversation started. I know being at home, stuck at home with COVID and all your kids is just beyond what most of us can handle, keeping our sanity. But the biggest saving grace that I have found is number 1 would be structure. I cannot emphasize enough how much structure will save you. I think making time, and being intentional about the time rather than letting the day control you and all the events control you, but rather you take control and make some structure. So the same thing goes with siblings through all this, from COVID and beyond. I've always structured time. There was structured time for the sibling each week. We had a trip every year that the sibling got to be completely in charge of picking. And I tried to make, times that it was just about him. And I had to structure that in, because if I tried to remember to do that on a regular basis, I didn't necessarily do that. My habits kind of controlled my day. So I had to make a habit of having structure. The time, not just spending time with the sibling, but actually how you spend that time. So what I've learned over the years in my trainings that was effective was letting that time be about them, letting them lead the discussion. So when they were younger, I had to spend time doing Minecraft and things that I would never want to interact on with them necessarily on, but that even 15 minutes was about letting them lead the interaction, not having it be about my interests or my ideas of how that time should go, but fully letting them lead. And by doing so they were very satisfied with the interaction then. They really felt like it was about them. So whether you can do 5 minutes of that or 15 or an hour is not as important as how that time is being spent. When I would direct how the time was spent, it never really felt like their time. So something to consider. The second thing that I would want to discuss is the pressure. Oliver's candidly said, and when we've done the SIB panels over the years, we've always heard that the siblings sometimes often feel pressure. They have to be the good one. because they want to put less stress on you as a parent, and they understand how stressful your life is with your child with Duchenne. Some kids, that looks like them being the perfect kid all the time or most of the time. Some kids, it actually looks the opposite because they have that pressure. Instead of reacting to that pressure that way, they actually start acting out and make sure that they take just as much time as the other child with Duchenne. Their time, and they're acting out and they don't feel the pressure, but that behavior could be a result of that pressure that they feel. They're just rebelling against it. So that's something to think about. And also the fact that, like, I know in our scenario, Anthony is the oldest. So Oliver never had any role model for social interactions because Anthony had social anxiety. And in our case, Anthony's a little bit on the spectrum. So he didn't have great communication skills, and he had, issues with friends and things like that because of the Duchenne. And so Oliver didn't really have an older sibling to learn that from. So Oliver ended up having a little bit more social anxiety than I think typically a second order child would. And so that's something to keep in mind too, because that was a lot of pressure. Oliver always had to lead the social interactions and had to try to help the social situation because Anthony couldn't really do that. And then third, I would say my thing that I've learned is perspective. It's inevitable that our boys with Duchenne take up more time. They get more attention. They get more, whether it's positive or negative. Of course, what they're going through isn't fair, but still overall, the picture is they're taking up more space. And the one thing I learned early on in doing all this work that was helpful to me was that I started realizing that we're all humans. We're all just as valuable as each other. Our kids are all individual humans that have individual contributions to this world. And one sibling was no more important than the other, even if he had extra needs. And so trying to remember that and not letting that get out of proportion and seeing the big picture and saying that it's okay for Oliver to go off with his friends, even though Anthony doesn't have any. Or it's okay for Oliver to not have to be responsible for how Anthony feels. Setting up those types of boundaries because I kept in perspective that, that we're all equally important, myself included. I have to take my time as well. I know that's easier said than done. It took me years to actually implement it. So I'm not just whipping off advice that's easy to follow by any means, but I am sharing with you the most important things that I've learned academically and in my experience that were the most helpful. That perspective also includes the sibling deciding whether they want to be included and being honest with that sibling about the information about their brother. Because we found through lots of research that kids that weren't told the truth about their brother's disorder made up stories or found stories that were more often than not worse than the truth. So as parents, we're trying to protect them, and we didn't honor that they have the right to know. Of course, that information could be age appropriate, but still the truth is there so that they can cope with it. They're just as invested, and their brother is just as important in well-being, and whether they show it or not, they are impacted by those things that are going on. So to not include them because you think you're protecting them, come to find out isn't necessarily the most productive way to handle it. So those are like my top 3 things to get the conversation started. I could chime in later after others have shared.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Jill. Really appreciate that. Jill also, I just wanted to let you know, has done Sib Shop forever. She's certified in Sib Shop. So she is our expert in siblings and what they need. And so I want to invite you, we're going to talk to Abby Killian for just a few minutes, and then invite you to just put some questions in the comment section so we can ask Jill and Abby. Abby has been a sibling. She have Sam Killian. You may have remember that last Friday we had her mom, Stephanie Killian, on. Abby is the oldest of 5, and she is working in DC as a legislative consultant. And correspondent, sorry. And Abby is going to just share a little bit about what her experience has been as an older sibling of Sam, who has Duchenne, and just the dynamics within all of the siblings. So, Abby, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here and to share what I've learned over the years as a sibling. So I have three younger brothers and a younger sister. The youngest of my brothers, Sam, has Duchenne. So lots of sibling time over the years. And just a few things that I wanted to touch on that helped my family, and then I hope will help other families too. The first thing I wanted to point out was something that Jill also pointed out, which is the importance of being honest with the other kids that don't have Duchenne in your family. It can be really scary as a sibling because you obviously know that your brother has this disease, but it can be really scary to want to ask questions because sometimes you don't really want to know the answer. But I think it's so important as parents to understand that and to offer up information that is age appropriate, of course, but that will kind of help them understand, and they don't have to wonder or be concerned, um, or create things in their mind that might not be true. And so I think being honest and offering some things is much better than leaving them in the dark. Um, Also, something that was really helpful for me and my family and my siblings was being included in the Duchenne world, and that will look different for different families. For my family, it meant that we would go to the doctor's appointments sometimes with Sam, and maybe not be in the room the whole time, but at least be there, see what Sam was going through, what his life was like in that very specific Duchenne area, which we didn't always get to see a normal day-to-day life. It also meant kind of offering us some control in a way that we could kind of feel like we had an impact on what was going on. For my family, that looked like me and my siblings run the marathons every year. We're part of the running program. And so we run, I think, usually just one half marathon a year for me. But that we could help fundraise and we could feel like we were actually doing something to make a difference in the community, versus, just this thing that our family is dealing with that we can't do anything about. And that also included going to the advocacy conference every year, or the conference in the summer, for the entire Duchenne community. And that was a way to, actually feel like we were advocating for our brothers or talking about it in a way that made it less scary. And it also let us meet other people, other boys with Duchenne, other siblings, and feel less alone, like we're not the only ones dealing with this in the entire world, and knowing that there are other people out there that are going through the same thing you are, and that are dealing with it too. Something that we also found really helpful with an actual sibling dynamic aspect was finding common ground with our brother with Duchenne, Sam. And sometimes that looks different for different families too. But I think helping encourage that where it already exists and facilitating that if you need to. But finding common ground that's not Duchenne related and finding ways to bond over things that aren't about Duchenne, so that that's an escape and that your relationship with them can grow in a way that's not always Duchenne focused all the time. Because ultimately, your sibling has Duchenne, but that's only a small part of who they are. And understanding, that that's just a part of who they are and that you can have a relationship with them beyond that too. And that looks different for everybody too. For me and Sam, that is going to see movies together. We try to go to see the Star Wars movies when they come out. I'm sure there'll be another one in like 2 years that we can go see together. And it's just really helpful. Sometimes that means you drive your kids to the movie theater and, let them have their time together. And sometimes, that just means encouraging what they're already doing together. And the last thing I think that was really helpful that my parents did for us is understanding that there's definitely a difference between logically understanding and emotionally understanding. Logically, my siblings and I, we knew that Sam had Duchenne. We knew that he was different, that he had different needs than the rest of us. and that he needed more attention and more care because of that. Emotionally, that's kind of tough to understand, especially when you're younger and when your siblings are closer in age. I think it's tough to see the difference there and to recognize it on an emotional level. So understanding that, like, we know and we respect that they need more care and attention, but that sometimes it's harder to deal with that than others, and there are going to be times when we're emotional about it or we're acting out because of that, and it's not necessarily something that we're doing on purpose. Just that that's how it kind of shows up sometimes, and sometimes we need help recognizing when it's emotional versus logical. So those are the things I wanted to touch on, I think, and I look forward to questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Abby. That's really helpful just to hear your perspective. And, I've always said Duchenne siblings are just some of my favorite people on earth because they've also had to just deal with so many things, and yet they still just come alongside the family in so many ways. I have one question I want to send to Jill, and just remind you to keep, send your questions in. Jill, we know a lot of the Duchenne siblings, they go with the flow. They're helpful and things like that. And so I want you to talk a little bit about two things. One, when you have a Duchenne sibling that maybe feels like they have to be too perfect. And then the other side of it, when you have a Duchenne sibling that's just very resentful and just kind of is not helpful in the family dynamic with some of that. So can you address those two things?
Let me unmute. So perfect. Yeah. So my area of expertise, academically anyway, was behavior. So both of those. So behavior, when I say behavior, whenever I start talking behavior, people automatically think that's bad behavior, right? That's what that word means. That's not what that word means. Behavior is a way to communicate your needs. Behavior can be good behavior, bad behavior, different behavior, but it's the way you're communicating what you need. So it's just as worrisome to a behaviorist to have a kid that's in a corner that doesn't speak as it is to have a kid that's running around pulling all the chairs off the table. Those are just two different communications of different needs. And what often happens is we're all paying attention to the kid throwing the chairs around the room, and we're not paying attention to the one that's got the maladaptive behavior corner that can't communicate their needs, and they just go with the flow and do everything to be perfect. So I do want to bring that awareness that behaviors aren't personal. The best thing to do as a parent is to realize, okay, this kid is not acting out or withdrawing because I'm a terrible parent, because that's immediately what we think. We make it personal and we can't effectively address the behavior. But if we stand back and go, this kid is trying to communicate something. What's the message to this? And we work from that level, we can be a little bit more effective at taking it personal. They're both tough behaviors, because both of those behaviors are going to have, both ends of the spectrum are going to have ramifications. I think, we're always looking for the middle ground. We're always looking for balance. The method I shared with you about that concentrated time letting the child lead, that wasn't just my advice. That's a Greenspan theory. So it's a theory that's been used many years in relationship therapy and autism, and it was referred to as floor time, but you can extend it out from kids where you're actually sitting on the floor letting them lead the play, to older kids where you're letting them lead conversation or letting them discuss the topics that are interesting to them, even if you want to poke your eyes out. It doesn't matter. So the thing I was telling you about that you could try was an actual methodology that would actually help. Even 15 minutes a day is going to alleviate both spectrums of those behaviors. It's just a good place to start.
Okay. That's great. That's really helpful. And just kind of on continuing that, Abby, I know your family has done a really great job just of doing a lot of one-on-one time. Can you just share like some of your favorite things that you've done one-on-one with your family, or maybe that your siblings, your non-Duchenne siblings, have done with your parents?
Me unmute too. Um, So, and it looks different with different siblings too, and different parents. But I think some of the best things that we had the opportunity to do were, one year Sam was in part of a study at UCLA, and so that was, a trip to LA, which sounds great when you're a kid. And why can't I go to LA? So actually, I think my parents switched off taking one sibling each time. You had to go every like 6 months, and so we'd take a different sibling every time. And that was really, it kind of was twofold in that we got to see what Sam was experiencing and got to be a part of a world that we weren't usually included in. And that was more of the technical side of actually seeing the study. But then we were in LA, so we would go to like Disneyland or Legoland, or I think we went to the zoo there one time, which was great. And so being a part of that and actually having time to bond with your sibling and also, be a little more included in their life and like what they actually experience that you might not know about if you're just at home. And then other things my parents do that really helped, I think, is they would take, us on different trips too, that were, unrelated. And that was always really good bonding time too. Um, and it was things like that that kind of made the difference for us, I think, like, not necessarily being Duchenne related, but still being able to bond and to have a different relationship with our sibling.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, sometimes we think it has to be something big, but like Jill said, it can be 15 minutes just a day. And so the big trips are important, and so are the little 15-minute times that you just carve out. So Jill, I wanted to ask you a question. How do you work through with the non-affected the sibling? Maybe just some guilt they may have about not having Duchenne, and as they go through their life, how do you set them up um, in their childhood when they're with you at your home, just to help them work through some of those feelings that they might have of guilt?
Great. So yeah, it's almost survivor's guilt, right? Like they have that, and some of the moms have that too, that are carriers have that survivor's guilt. So we talk a lot about the fact that everybody's life has challenges throughout their lifetime. And maybe Anthony's are obvious now, and maybe his time being here is going to be shorter, and we're going to see all the challenges all at once. But if you back up, I always use the example like a little mouse on a big, rug. You can only see that little tiny pattern that you're looking at. But if you back up and look at the big picture, all of us will be going through challenges. We all have our burdens throughout our lifetime. So I tried to always let Oliver know this is what we see right now, but you don't know what kind of challenges you're going to face. And you don't know what hardship you're going to have to go through, because that's all unknown at this point. So you don't need to feel bad that things are good right now for you, because we're all going to have times in our life where things are good and we celebrate. And then things are not so good and we buckle down and have to get through it. Nobody escapes that, right? So I try to start with that premise. I remember one time when Oliver was little, something happened to Anthony, medical, and Oliver said, "Mom, when are the bad things going to stop happening?" And I said, it was so poignant, and I looked at him and I said, "Buddy, they're not. That's why we got to make a big deal out of the good things." I mean, that's what this whole ride is for all of us. And if you're so focused on Duchenne, and you're so focused on your son who has Duchenne being a victim, and everybody's treating him like a victim all the time, you're losing focus that all of us are going to, we all come to this life with some cards that are dealt. And if it's not now, it's probably going to happen throughout the years that we're here. So I try to instill that philosophy. I'm not trying to get too philosophical. I don't know if that's true or not, but that idea is what set a very healthy precedence for us and got us through. And Oliver has got guilt that there's just all the psychology in the world and spiritual approach is not going to cure. But I at least alleviated enough. And more importantly, I left it open enough to have those conversations so we could at least express it and talk through it. And there was no holds barred.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Jill. And another question I want you to answer, because I think you've done this well just with your kids and your family, is what do you do when sometimes in the family dynamic, it seems like the Duchenne kid is getting away with everything because of behavior. I think sometimes we know their behavior can be erratic and you just kind of want to make it stop. So you maybe pacify them, and the siblings feel like that's not fair, that they're being held to a different discipline standard. So can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. That's huge. And we struggled with it. And no matter how educated I was, it had nothing to do with how I parented. We struggled with that, First of all, it goes back again to that premise that he's a victim. Is he? I mean, that's where you got to do your work, because if I'm treating him like a victim and I have no boundaries with him, he gets to do whatever he wants because poor Anthony. And then my other son doesn't have to live by those standards, but I'm teaching my other son that victim mentality. And I'm a victim because poor me, I have a son with Duchenne. I mean, the whole thing can permeate the family. And then you've got this family without boundaries that's totally codependent and has all these maladaptive behaviors. So I really tried, and of course, again, not perfectly by any stretch. But I just really tried to Anthony wanted to be normal. So normal is that he gets in trouble for his crap. I mean, that's normal. And I think on some levels, he appreciates getting in just as much trouble as Oliver. He might not like it, but he felt safer with those boundaries. I never have let him talk, disrespectfully to people. I mean, he does, but there's always been repercussions for that. I don't care how hard things were for him, he still has to be a pleasant person. I used to actually tell him, you almost got to be a little bit more pleasant, because here's the deal, buddy. You need everybody's help all the time. And no one wants to help someone who's not nice. So I'm sorry that's your burden. I feel badly that's your burden, but that's the truth. And we all have our different burdens. And the same with Oliver, I, on the opposite end, I let Oliver get away with a lot. Oliver didn't have to really do chores because Anthony couldn't. And I didn't have the energy and the wherewithal to figure that out. It was like, forget it. I'll just do it for everybody. So I created a lot of, little bit of victim mentality in Oliver in that sense. Like, me, why do I have to do this? Anthony doesn't do it. And, so there was a little bit of that, but as we talked it through and as I got better, I think honestly, you're not going to do it perfectly no matter how much you know. So I think really the key is awareness. So I'd see it and I'd be like, oh, my bad. And I'd go to Oliver and I'd actually take my part and be accountable and apologize and say, you know what? I didn't handle that very good, Oliver. I apologize for that. Let me try to do better. And he has said, now that he's older and can talk to me, he said that was really powerful because, knowing that I was learning as I went too, things were more forgivable for all of us. There wasn't this pressure that I had to be the parent and we could have conversations about, hey, maybe I didn't do that right. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm still feeling this out too. So that's kind of the approach that we found most effectively. I implemented it as, best as.
Yeah, I think that's great. And the struggles you mentioned, I think all of us as Duchenne parents struggle with that. I struggle constantly with the chore situation and knowing that I want my Duchenne child to have chores and the sibling as well, and how to manage that. And that's a really tough one. So I know if anybody has any good chores for Duchenne boys, could you put them in the comments section? Because I think we could all use help with what chores can we give our boys? Because that's I think they need it to feel part of the family and to feel responsible for the in the family as well. But list those chores because I definitely need some. For Abby, there's a question, just how do you handle conflict with Sam? How do you work through that with him?
It definitely looks different now that I'm older and don't live at home anymore. But when we had conflict in the past, it was always, wouldn't say we got along perfectly well, but I tried to kind of keep in mind that things were different for him and that they were in some respects harder for him, and to keep that at the forefront. Obviously that didn't always happen, but when you do have conflict with your sibling, whatever that looks like, I think it's better to kind of facilitate an environment where you can go to them and you can reflect on your behavior, and then be able to kind of apologize and make up and move on from that. And I think my parents did a good job of that, of making sure that, when we did have conflict, it wasn't, well, you can't do that to him because it's not fair. It was, you've had this fight, you need to work through it together. And it was never one sided. It was both people were both in the conflict equally, and not just one sided because you're older, are supposed to know better. You don't have Duchenne, you're supposed to, help them. But making sure that both people come together and can resolve that and move on.
Mm. That's good. Um, Another question that I want Jill to weigh in on, and then also for Abby to weigh in on. But Jill, I know we've talked about this in conversations before, but how do you manage when the siblings want to do activities that the Duchenne child can't do? And I know for some families that becomes really sticky. Like, do we just not do that activity? So how do you negotiate that? And then after you finish, Abby, I want you to kind of say, how did you negotiate that in your family?
Great. Again, it came back to the scheduling and the structure because um, it was always clear to Anthony that there was Oliver's time and Anthony's time. There was never, that was just always there from the beginning. So when it was Oliver's time, we got to do what we wanted. And if that was ride roller coasters because Anthony couldn't, that's what we went and did. Now, we got a little carried away. We're not normal. And we went and made a hiking chair, and we got Anthony down to the Grand Canyon and did some really extraordinary things, not by ourselves, with much, much help from the community. So we were a little above and beyond what most parents probably have the energy for, honestly. For years, my anger and frustrations were driven into things like that. But now I'm tired and he wants to go for a hike. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm too tired sometimes, which is how a lot of parents feel for everybody. However, we were able to get really creative, and I also relied on family friends to take Oliver to do things that Anthony couldn't do. So, when he started having young boy friends, I just, I would really just come heart to heart with the moms of the other boys and be like, can do to get you to take Oliver to play this airsoft thing, or to go do these that go with a bunch of boys and jump off things or whatever. Please take him for me because I'm in this predicament and it's really hard. And I had women step up that did that would take them and provide all these hardy boy activities that I couldn't necessarily do because I was juxtaposing the two of them, So I built a village. I built a village to help me. That's the bottom line. And I just really paid attention to the structure.
That's great, Jill. I love that, like reaching out to other people, which is sometimes hard for us, but to reach out to others to help you do some of those things. So, Abby, how did that play out in your house?
Yeah, and I think it's similar to what Jill was saying. It's that everybody had their own thing, and understanding that just because one sibling has one thing, that doesn't mean the other sibling is deprived of their own thing. So I, did dance and gymnastics and things like that as a kid. And it was all just kind of understood that we made sacrifices to make sure that all of us could get to those things. So, my brothers came to my gymnastics meets and my practice. I went to my brother's games. I went to their soccer, baseball, all of that. And we showed up for Sam's things too. He was in choir, and he still is, I guess. And so we would show up to his things too. Sorry. And making sure that everyone understood that that's what you do as a family, is you show up to people's things and you make sure that everyone's thing is equally important, and you don't put one thing above the rest. And I think it comes down to communication about it too, and understanding that, hey, you did this thing, now your sibling has this thing too, and we need to make sure that their thing is just as important as what you did. And sometimes that did lead to conflict. There were times where it was like, I don't want to go to the fifth soccer practice of the week, but I think it was instilled in us that that's what you do as a family, and I think that's what really made the difference.
And just to add to that, you're sending your Duchenne. I think sometimes we can just say, okay, Duchenne child, you can stay at home while we go do the other activities or stay with one parent. But involving the Duchenne child to go to the siblings activities, I know that's important for my daughter, is that my son goes and supports her. And sometimes that's a fight. But again, I think that helps with the family balance, so that it's not all about the child with Duchenne, and that sometimes they have to sacrifice for their sibling. I think that's an important component that we sometimes miss, is that the Duchenne child needs to sometimes, sacrifice something so that the sibling can have a moment. I wanted to say thank you to Alpha for putting some suggestions in there. That's great. Appreciate you doing that. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Please continue to put them below. I wanted to ask Abby, I think with our Duchenne siblings, because sometimes they do have to sacrifice, sometimes they do have to go the extra mile. I'm always thinking of, how can I show just some appreciation and gratitude to them, and just saying, I see you, I see your extra sacrifice. So I don't know, is there anything, and then Jill, maybe you can, if you have ideas too, but Abby, is there anything you feel like, yeah, this is how my parents have just kind of said thank you or expressed gratitude for me being part of the family the way I am?
Yeah, and I think that's something that's very important, and something my parents did a great job at. And I think sometimes it is as easy as saying that, as maybe there's a hard day in there somewhere with a sibling, is maybe not acting the way they should because they feel kind of neglected, or maybe it's just a day where the sibling has to do something they didn't want to do. But I think it can be as easy as saying that, and saying, look, I know you didn't want to do that. I know that was hard for you, but thank you. And that can be something you don't always think to say, but that can mean a lot to hear. I think it does also look like, making things work when you can, even if it's inconvenient. If the non-Duchenne sibling really wants to do something and you're kind of not sure how it's going to work, but going the extra mile to make sure that does happen, even if it's not exactly the way that you imagined, or if it's harder. I think that's a really easy, well, not easy, but it's a good way to show that just because you have to sacrifice a lot, it doesn't mean that we won't sacrifice back for you and make sure that you get to do what you want to do. That's not always possible, but recognizing when it is, I think, is really important too.
Jill, do you have some thoughts too?
I appreciate everything you shared. I would say the same. One of my strategies as a parent, with both my boys, but especially Oliver, is from my behavior training, I don't really say no and hear me on this before everybody starts freaking out. I say, yeah, after you do this, or yes, under these circumstances, or yes, under this criteria. So everything kind of started as a negotiation, but I didn't just shut it down with no, like I'm too tired, I'm too stressed, because usually that's what no is no is like me not even thinking about saying, and just saying no means I'm just tired, please just don't ask me another thing. I immediately catch myself and go, well, okay, sure, once you've done these things, or once I've talked to these parents to make sure it's okay, or whatever the criteria is, but I just always tried to stop myself from just shutting things down for the wrong reasons, And then when he did want something that was extra, I would make sure at that point, Abby, I would say, absolutely, you deserve it. Because I was just thinking about these 3 things that you just did and naming them, these 3 things that you just did that I know you didn't want to do. So I'd be happy to do this for you. So that the awareness, was there that they were getting a reward out of it,
Yeah, that's good. Abby, I want to go back to one thing you said that I think is really important, your connection with other Duchenne siblings. And I know some people connect through conference and that sort of thing, but do you have any ideas just how families can connect their siblings to other Duchenne siblings and kind of what that's meant for you?
Yeah, so most of our connections came through conference and things like that at other Duchenne PPMD events in particular. A lot of it came through, we do the Disney marathons every year. A lot of it came through that weekend too. But what's nice about it is it really only takes, one time of interacting with that group of people to kind of find your people. And so we immediately kind of have a bond of like, we have this thing in common, this really big thing in common in our life that we both, or we all have a sibling with Duchenne. And so it's much easier to make a connection with people. And then it's much easier to keep up that connection with people. Of course, our community is kind of flung across the nation. And you don't always get to see those people in person, but luckily there's a lot of great ways to connect virtually now, especially now. And so kind of fostering those relationships and finding them once you do find them, kind of keeping them up any way you can. I still have Duchenne siblings that I text all the time and talk to, and that are really a part of our lives. And it's, they're much closer than friends. We call them our cousins. We call them, family, because that's what they've become. So, and I realize not everyone can make it to conference. Not everyone can, travel and find these opportunities to connect. But I think even, your other friend or family of friends, like other parents that see what you can do to connect your kids and your non-Duchenne kids, and see what you can do to foster and cultivate those relationships, because they're really strong and really powerful and helpful. So, whatever it looks like, I think those are important to have.
Thanks, Abby. I would also just throw it out there that maybe if you're in a more rural area or something and there aren't a lot of Duchenne families around you, you can reach out to just other special needs families and those siblings because they share a similar experience. And that may be a way to get your sibling connected to someone close by, even if it's not necessarily a Duchenne family, but their experiences are similar. And I know just what Jill has done through Sib Shop, that's for all special needs, siblings. So just encourage you to reach out that way, because I think a lot of us know the benefit of having other Duchenne mom and dads that we connect with, and the siblings need that too. So just as we're wrapping up, I want to invite Jill and Abby, if there's just any last thoughts, any last encouragement you can say to the families regarding siblings and that sort of thing. So we'll start with Jill.
Oh, well, anyway, that was a great point, Rachel. I'm glad you made that point. And I just, as a caveat, I want to say it's been healthy for Anthony to have friendships with kids with different special needs and not just Duchenne. So he can identify that, hey, lots of people out there have challenges and struggles, and actually most of us do. Some are more obvious than others. That's all. So my final thoughts, I guess, are just, we're all doing the best we can. This is such a challenging road, but it's such a rich road. I mean, I guess my parting note is to, try. This took me so many years to learn. I'm just now getting it, but not to come from a place of pity. Don't pity your siblings. Don't pity your kid with Duchenne. It's so hard to do that. But if you can find a way, whether it's spiritually to make sense of it, or logically, or talk to other people, like when I talk to my other Duchenne moms, I instantly hang up and I don't feel super sorry for us, because I know there's just so many of us going through it. Everybody's got their challenges. And that really helps me parent better when I'm not coming from that place of being a victim or my kids being victims. I parent stronger and healthier. And I guess that's what I've learned over this very, very difficult journey. So.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Abby, what are your last thoughts?
I think probably just that, even when it doesn't look like it or doesn't sound like it with the way your kid's acting or the siblings, treating each other, I think at the end of the day, we all really love each other, and we're just trying to do the best we can to understand our sibling, and to help them. And we feel very protective, I think, a lot of the time, but can't always act on that. So I think recognizing that, and including, the non-Duchenne siblings in the Duchenne world, and helping them understand what they can do to help their sibling, what they can do to help them day to day. Maybe they can help them do some tasks, or maybe they can work together on chores even, and helping them, take care of them sometimes when it's reasonable and makes sense. And then just helping them understand their brother, or their sibling in a way, that makes sense for their relationship. And I think, at the end of the day, just, even if we don't act like it, we really are doing our best.
That's great. I like what you said, just making them part of the process. Sometimes in the Duchenne journey, we get focused just on our child with Duchenne or just on our own feelings. And I love this webinar, because it takes a moment for us to step back a little bit further from 30,000 feet and say, okay, what is the whole family, and how do we consider that as we go through just this Duchenne journey? So I really appreciate Jill and Abby. This has been so helpful for me personally, and I hope for other people as well. And again, I just so grateful for the siblings and what they bring to Duchenne, and just all the things that we can learn from them. So I think that's important to remember. They are part of the process. Well, thank you so much for joining us for Family Friday. We hope that you've enjoyed this, and we will see you again soon. Bye, everybody.